the record. Okay, there we go.
Okay.
Okay, so God, good morning again, and would just love to hear from you about what made you think about starting this neighborhood resilience project or some project that targeted whatever it was you saw needed to be targeted. So the floor is yours, Father Paul.
Well, Elaine, thank you. It's so good to be with you today. And the origin of the Neighborhood Resilience Project goes back to a moment early on in my ministry, just out of seminary, working in a neighborhood that was predominantly Black, an underserved community. And like so many people who feel called to serve in a community like that, we just started to do whatever we could that was positive. What could we do? Maybe food, maybe clothing, maybe help provide some kind of comfort for people in times of distress, but really looking at those basic needs, just trying to do something positive in the community. We didn't know what we would do beyond that. But what really, really struck me early on in my work was just the immense amount of suffering that was occurring on a regular basis in the community. The loss, the pain, the fear, the stress of multi-generational poverty was all taking its toll. The consequences of policies that were not in the best interest of these people, systems that were failing catastrophically in this community, all created, especially in the context of the history of this community, the history of these people, all created just a legacy of suffering that was characterizing life in the community. Trauma, really, it was at that particular time that we began to really confront just this notion of trauma beyond the trauma of an individual, recognizing that it was a community that was heavy laden with trauma, and that even if someone didn't have a direct experience of trauma, that trauma was all around all the time. That was characterizing, even if it wasn't the direct experience of trauma, it was characterizing the life of everyone in that community. People could, even if they had not experienced, if they were not themselves victims of gun violence, most people could say what it was like to throw your children on the ground and jump on top of them when you heard gunshots. And people, though they weren't incarcerated, they would know what it is to see somebody locked up or to have a relative that was incarcerated, to talk to people who had experienced the loss of incarceration. I mean, though they themselves were not being evicted, just see and confront and hear those stories of people in social networks all around who were suffering from eviction. This was the way life was in this community, and we began to wrestle with this notion not just of individual trauma, but what is community trauma, and what is the impact of community trauma on this entire people. That led us to partner with local universities, the University of Pittsburgh and Duquesne University, most notably, to help us study this issue of community trauma. What was so fascinating was when we first started to look at this issue in 2012, really the literature around community trauma was looking at communities that had suffered this catastrophic traumatic event all together as a community. So it would look at communities like New York at 9/11, or New Orleans at Hurricane Katrina. They experienced this one traumatic event altogether as a community, but there wasn't much to be said for communities that had these layering of trauma over many generations, that had this collective experience of trauma over many generations, this historical trauma with one people group over many generations. And that discovery compelled us to really engage this topic of community trauma and expand the understanding of what community trauma is. And so from that work, we began to have a series of community conversations, really looking at the kinds of trauma that was occurring in the community, and very, very profound conversations with diverse groups of people. There were certainly mothers who lost their sons to gun violence. We had rape victims, we had academicians, we had psychologists, police officers. We tried to get a very comprehensive perspective on this. And all of this led us really in 2014 to conduct a consultative workshop in which we attempted to problematize this issue of community trauma so that we could develop a response to it. That exercise in 2014 is what resulted in this framework we now refer to as trauma-informed community development. And it's a series of interventions and work really dedicated to the proposition of moving what we call trauma-affected communities to resilient, healing, and healthy communities. This is the process by which we achieve this transformation. And we believe very strongly that we should be able to understand empirically when we are making this transition. What will be the result? Certainly improved health and well-being, and also a culture of health. Robert Wood Johnson talks about a culture of health. The antithesis is also true. Community culture that's informed first and foremost by trauma results in cultural norms that reinforce unhealthy lifestyles. So really looking how we are understanding that shift in culture, the improved health and well-being, what is the resilience building strategies that are happening, and how we're measuring the resilience in certainly individuals, but also on a community level. And all of this has given birth to what is now known as the Neighborhood Resilience Project.
Wow. And so you started in 2012. And when did you actually launch the Neighborhood Resilience Project?
Well, what happened to us is when we started getting into this in 2012, we started to do this work and experiment. And then it wasn't even until, and so we started to do some community-based interventions. It wasn't until 2018, where we had enough of an understanding of what this was to launch the Neighborhood Resilience Project.
Okay. And what are the pieces of the Neighborhood Resilience Project?
Well, in terms of the actual work that we do, we're really focused on community support, health and well-being, and leadership development in terms of the actual interventions that we're doing. Community support is where we're really taking a hard look at engaging with the crisis, helping alleviate stress, reduce stress, undermine strain, alleviate strain. This is kind of the work that we're focused on with community support. You will see basic needs programs. You'll see crisis interventions. You'll see emergency relief, financial support. It's funny, this one woman said one time, "I don't like my therapist." And I said, "Why don't you like your therapist?" She said, "He told me I have depression." And I said, "Do you disagree with the diagnosis?" She said, "I do. I'm not depressed. I just need help paying my light bill." And that anecdote reveals a very real truth, that sometimes we diagnose these, but the real source of the depression, the real source of the stress is some kind of financial strain. So we really have to take a hard look at that and address that, whether it be food, financial resources, or just some sort of crisis intervention, therapeutic interactions that we have staff members trained to facilitate with people in crisis. We then move to health and well-being, and health and well-being is where we're taking we're doing a deeper dive over more long-term health intervention strategies. And this is where we have community-based interventions that are really looking at a hyper-local level at where the concentrations of trauma are, and we have partnership with government agencies to help us measure specific government data to understand where the concentrations of those trauma are in the community. Once we understand that, we have year-long intervention process by which we are working to improve health and well-being and establish a culture of health in these communities. We've been measuring this work with a health assessment system we've designed with in partnership with the University of Pittsburgh called I Am Healthy, that gives us the ability to measure the impact of these interventions on the health of a person, household, block, and ultimately neighborhood. We've seen very favorable results as a result of these interventions since we've been doing them in 2016. We also have a trauma response team that responds to homicides as a result of gun violence. We're working to conduct psychological first aid in the immediate aftermath of the homicides, understanding that we have to have a healing presence in community, and that even the healing presence in community in the immediate aftermath of a tragic incident, traumatic incident, a murder, also is building resilience in the community, helping the community really bounce back from such a tragic event as rapidly as possible. We have a free health center where we're looking at addressing the health the health safety net, providing a safety net for people who really are uninsured, people who don't have insurance, people who have no access to health care, because we know that's going to be a key component to make sure that we have the ability to provide health supports for everybody that is a part of these broader community interventions. And of course, we have a strong public health intervention piece that we do with community health deputies and community health workers, where we're really looking at, in medically underserved communities, working to reduce the death gap with public health interventions. And of course, the death gap is reference to the disparity in life expectancy rates we see from one neighborhood to the next. In our neighborhood, we have a 20-year lower life expectancy than another neighborhood that's about 2 miles away from us, for example. So really trying, we have a team of what we call community health deputies, community members that we've deputized in the public health approach, as well as community health workers who have that certification, who are working to implement public health interventions in medically underserved communities, the goal of which is to reduce the death gap. The third aspect of our work is in leadership development. And this is where we really look at the civil rights movement for our instruction in this, and understanding the civil rights movement really didn't just happen, but rather it was very intentional by way of the vast infrastructure of leadership development that was created across the South to develop the kind of leadership needed to make positive change in our community. So we believe very strongly that in resilience building work, in the trauma-informed work, we have to have an infrastructure to train and develop leadership to be positive change makers in our community. So we do a lot of training with people, both here locally, regionally. People, as part of the interventions, we're always training leadership teams. We, in addition to that, are train other teams here, both regionally and nationally, in trauma-informed community development framework. We've trained people from multiple cities: Cleveland, Kansas City, Indianapolis, Wind River Indian Reservation, Sarasota, Florida, New Britain, Connecticut, and the list really goes on. How we're working to train and prepare people to facilitate trauma-informed community development in their own communities, as well as even training youth here who are most likely to shoot or be shot, to reorient their leadership. Some of those that are opinion leaders in their community, reorient their leadership and work to make them leaders in resilience building leaders, healing-centered leaders among their peers. So these three pillars of our work, trauma-informed community development, these three pillars of trauma-informed community development are how we facilitate this transformation on a community level.
Wow. Wow. I want to do this tomorrow. No, I'm it's like, yeah, this is what needs to happen. And I think that it's so fantastic, that it has happened there. And that it's being measured, it's being looked at. It sounds like you have a lot of community input, and I'm a big fan of not telling people what we think they need,
Right.
but letting people tell us, listening to people and hearing them and getting it. So often I think when people start programs, they think they know exactly what the community needs.
Right.
They go in and tell them about it.
That's right.
And then it doesn't work.
That's right.
You get fewer and fewer people out to meetings, you get fewer and fewer people answering surveys, whatever, and fewer people voting.
Yes, that's true.
Because they're not being heard.
True.
We're talking to them.
That's right.
And I think it's so fantastic that that you continue to engage the community and gauge the community based on what they're saying and what they're doing is just fantastic. Yeah. And so you have a big organization. How big is your organization?
Well, we have here working on the ground, we have about, if you take all the full-time, part-time, partnership supports we have, there's about 54 people in the organization that are doing this work here in the Neighborhood Resilience Project. And yeah, so so it continues to grow. Of course, the across the span of those persons working here at the organization, there's the impact of, on an annual basis is really quite significant, into the thousands of people that are really touched by this work every year. So we're very grateful for the growth that we've experienced. I think I'm even more grateful for the many leaders that seem to have emerged through this work. And it's, for me, so beautiful to see how this initiative is successful in the rising, compassionate, empowered healer leaders that emerge in the context of that work, and that truly gives me so much joy.
I imagine so. I was particularly interested when you said, and I didn't realize that there is a program in Indianapolis. I wondered how close to us you got.
We trained some friends from Indianapolis, yeah. So they, I don't think they're doing a full iteration of the work like we're doing, but they did come through the Institute for training for sure.
Uh-huh. Well, that's good to know. That's good to know. I'm sure there's a lot involved. There's an awful lot involved in anything we try to do.
Yeah, for sure.
When you try to, to change the fabric of a community that is anybody's, we're all capable of making change if we just realize how big an effect it has on all of us
Right.
who live in a community. It makes a tremendous amount of difference.
Right.
And I liked your story about the woman with depression, because I do so much with kids and behaviors, and everybody looks at the behavior and they never look underneath the behavior. So we've got a label for the behavior, and we treat that, and we never look underneath. And it's true of adults as well. It doesn't have to be just children. And we're quick to label somebody and work on fixing the label, so that they no longer have that label, but we don't do it. But we do little to fix what's underneath. Which is the only thing that you really can fix, and you can't do that with a pill. You can't do that. You can't do that with an hour session of therapy a week.
Right.
And it really does come down to community. And I suppose we could have a lot of information about trauma. We could go out there and preach about trauma from now until the end of time. But unless we say, yeah, but we can do something about it. We can help people heal, and we can help neighborhoods build resilience. And that doesn't, you don't pull up your big boy pants or your little boy pants or your little girl pants and just do it. It's got to be other people helping you. It's got to be the system. So I love the concept. It's and it's more than a concept. You've got a working program that keeps you busy 24/7.
Very busy indeed. Very busy.
And there is that. And you have many more years left than I do. So
We'll see. We'll see.
I'm sure you do. That doesn't stop me, however. Uh,
That's right.
um, if you had any words of wisdom for our community, a community that's hurting, a community that's in bad shape, what would it be? What would you put out there?
My words of wisdom, I think, for a community that is suffering is it is extremely important to understand that as a result of that suffering, there is, in the midst of all that pain, an extraordinary wisdom. Sometimes that wisdom in suffering communities can be neglected, it can be silenced, it can be abused. The work I would encourage in that context is to seek that old wisdom that was born out of the most severe kind of suffering, engage with it, organize it, foster it, tend to it, and build with it. And if we can do that, we can lay truly the foundation for an extraordinary, peaceful, just, resilient, and healthy community.
Yeah, 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 I like that. I like that a lot. And I think you're absolutely right. And I think it comes back around to listening to people and hearing them and getting their wisdom. They've been through it, they know it. And maybe we have to help them put words to it, but it still
Right.
it has to come from them.
Right.
And then that's what we need to tend to.
Mm.
Wow. Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. I'm going to take you off recording because I have something that I wanted to say. So I'll do that. I will. I guess I could pause it. I don't know. How do I stop? Oh, I could do